Hey everyone, so we're back for our third and final session of the day. It's a session which I'm extremely excited about, which is very close to home for me. Our speaker today is Mr. Sanjay Jain. He's a partner at the Bharat Innovation Fund and a volunteer with AISpirit. He's been pivotal in several of the India Stack components that you'll be hearing about today. So it really is a masterclass and a treat for us to have him here. So thank you so much for being here, Sanjay. And over to you. Sorry, actually, before that, could we please have some virtual applause for our speaker and lots of it?
Yeah, thanks, Ayaman. Pleasure to be here and to speak really at a home event in that sense. And love to take the team through what we've done on the India Stack. Let me just sort of share a deck. Great. So welcome everybody. Today, we wanted to talk a little bit around the India Stack and in some sense also talk about how account aggregators fit into the whole scheme of things. Way back about 10, 12 years ago, only 17% of Indians actually had a bank account, and financial exclusion, was quite all over the place. And if you compare India on, in terms of percentage of adults with an account and GDP per capita, and we worked with the Bank of International Settlements on this, you would find that India was pretty close to what was the trend line, which sort of showed how this was distributed around the world. But then, by 2018, we had moved quite aggressively ahead, well ahead of where our GDP per capita would have placed us. And what happened in the meantime was the thing that was the question. And in some sense, a lot of the work that was done with the India Stack was what led to this big change. Most countries would have taken about 46 years to make that journey, and we were able to do that in a period of about 6 years. So the question comes really how we were able to achieve that. And it was a combination of three things. One was clearly political will, and there was a very proactive central bank. And the third piece of the puzzle, which is unique to us, is actually the India Stack. So question comes really is, what is the India Stack? Why is it so important? How did it make this change? And I wanted to talk you through some of that today. So we have almost all of us have seen the screen where we talk of India Stack in the sense of a stack, where there's an identity layer which gives everybody a unique ID. There's a payments layer which allows anyone to make a payment. And then there's a data empowerment layer which allows a secure sharing of data. And this actually then results in a bunch of APIs, which each of which is used to implement some of these pieces. Now, this stack was not built in a day. It was actually an effort which has spanned about a decade. And it's still ongoing. I don't want to say the entire effort's done. So we started with Aadhaar, which was launched in 2010. IMPS on the payment side followed around that same time. Aadhaar launched only with an auth API. In a couple of years, an eKYC API was launched. And while that was happening, a bunch of cash transfers started to take place through Aadhaar, through the Aadhaar payments bridge. And along with that, we had more and more people get bank accounts, and a Aadhaar-enabled payment system came into being. And around exactly that same time as the AEPS came into being, two new layers of the India Stack came up. One was the digital signature, which was a continuation on the identity side. But at the same time, on the data side, the digital locker came into being as a document repository. By 2016, we had UPI. And that's the time at which the conversations around the consent artifact happened. And this was then followed by the account aggregator specs. And that really brings us to today. And what we have seen is that we were able to use verifiable identity to leapfrog into where we are today. Now, just quickly, and I use the same deck for other reasons as well, particularly outside India. So everybody knows about Aadhaar. I'm going to skip it for a minute. But the adoption was quite rapid. From the launch in 2010, we reached 1 billion in about 5.5 years. And today we have about 95 to 98% plus population covered by Aadhaar. The number of authentications continue to grow. We do about 30 odd billion transactions on Aadhaar. We've done massive amounts of DBT through there, and about half the population actually has an Aadhaar-enabled bank account. This has led to massive changes in the way we are as a society. The number of people with an account has gone up. It went up by 45%, which is one of the largest jumps in any country ever in this shorter period of time. It's closed the gender gap in accounts. It's reduced the employment gap, percentage of people who are employed and unemployed with a bank account. It's reduced the education gap, and so on. So in many ways, we have used Aadhaar as a great leveler in the financial world, bringing many and more people into the formal financial system. This, of course, was accompanied by a lot of folks who are trying to understand what's happened in India and so on. So there's this group which created something called the State of Aadhaar, which went out to look for data that would tell them what Aadhaar was, how it was working, and what the people were responding with. And so about 92% of the people said that they were either satisfied or very, very satisfied with the way Aadhaar was working. For about 8% of the adults, this was their first ever ID. It was the first ID for homeless populations, for third genders, and most of the folks felt that it made PDS more reliable. And all of us know that using Aadhaar right away, and that's something which again most people knew about. UPI was the other big piece that happened over the way. It is a fully interoperable payment system, and you can conduct transactions from any bank account using any UPI-enabled app. So you could actually conduct your transactions through a State Bank of India account from inside a Citibank mobile banking app. This is something which is actually not available anywhere else around the world. In terms of impact, UPI was launched in 2016, and it's taken in a short amount of time, but 2017-18, there's about 8% of transactions of digital transactions. And last year, the year that just completed, it was 43% of digital transactions, far over cards and prepaid. This is shown even more dramatically here, where in 2016 you started zero, and by within another 8 months, within about a year or so, they overtook credit card transactions at point of sale. In another year, it was at about crossing the debit card transactions at the point of sale. In a few months, went past combined debit and credit cards throughout. And while it's not clearly visible here on this chart, we do about somewhere between, in this period of time, the last August 2016 to now, we have done anywhere in any given month between 5 to 600 million transactions at an ATM to about 800 to 900 million transactions at an ATM. So sometime last year, we also crossed the number of cash out transactions at an ATM, which I think is incredible. It points to how much UPI has become a big part of the story in India today, and it's where it's even starting to overtake the number of withdrawals from an ATM. It's also crossing the value of money withdrawn from an ATM. What chart you see here is primarily around the volume, which is the number of transactions. Now, I want to stay on this chart for just a little bit. This is something that we have seen, in many of the India Stack APIs. What happens is that it's a new system that's introduced. It starts out very slow, and it takes time. And in the first few months, it feels like nothing's moving. But then, at some point, when the use cases start to develop, is when usage starts to take off. And every new player in the ecosystem who brings a new use case, who comes in with energy to acquire customers, leads to a jump in the number of transactions. And then a kind of a network effect takes over, which results really in a massive growth. We've seen this with Aadhaar, we've seen this with UPI. And I'm actually hoping that we'll see the same with the account aggregator. And that's something which I want to talk through now. So as we saw, we've been very steadily bringing uh, many people into the formal economy. We've, through ID, through payment. But as they come into the formal economy, they get onto the internet. There's a lot of places where data is gathered, and then it starts to get used in proprietary silos. And our constant belief has been that the problem is not that companies are using the data, but it's that people are not able to use their own data for their own benefit. And which is something where account aggregators sort of step in, and they actually allow people to take some part of their data, which is in this case the financial data, and use it for their benefit. So this brings us to where we are much ahead of where the rest of the world is in terms of access to your own data. There are very few places in the world where people have complete access to their financial data, and India is pretty much getting to be a leader in that space. And so this is really where we would like to see this happen. But when we think in terms of financial inclusion, we have started to see this flywheel come into place, where we enable people to get access to the banking system through opening a bank account or a wallet or anything. This then enables incoming payments to come into these accounts. For example, particularly in the underserved segments, a lot of this is direct bank transfers. And once they are in there, they start to use it, and we offer, what seems pretty much like magic, payments that are instant, that are enabled and accessed from everywhere, and that then keeps them in the system. And once they are now here, we want to use the data to help them get access to, for example, credit or to other benefits, and that then causes them to grow. And this brings more people into the financial system, and this is a flywheel we want to tap to get this virtuous cycle, to take everybody to come into the system, to benefit from it, and then to grow. So I thought I would, with this overview, go into one of the use cases that we have seen, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So for this use case, I want to think in terms of our user. And so we are a persona. We have this lady called Rajni who used to sell food on the side of the road. Gets up in the morning and goes and buys some goods. She uses that to get access to those goods. She takes credit from her local moneylender, and then she buys the goods. She prepares the food, sells it, and then at the end of that same day, she sells the good. She repays the loan back to the moneylender, and then starts the cycle the next day. To do this, she typically pays a very high interest rate. And the question was, why can't she access credit from a formal source? And when we looked at everything, the answer came back was that sales cost is very high. The cost of actually getting her a loan, going through the process, is so high that to do it for a small loan is not viable. Similarly, the cost of servicing her is very high. So the ability to get an EMI collected, to contact her in case there's a delay, etc., is just not worth it for, again, a small loan. And the third is really that there's no credible data that we have about her business which would support giving her any kind of a loan. So all of these factors leads her to not getting credit from the formal system. And yet, in India, we have seen over the last couple of decades a movement called the microfinance lending. And microfinance lending has reached customers like her, where they do give her a loan, but because the cost of servicing is high, in the formal system, it actually has the highest interest rates. But that's required because it covers all these. And the customers who borrow from there are actually quite happy. They're very willing to pay those higher rates because now they have access to loans from the formal system, and which actually enables them to grow their business. Now, we were imagining this use case, I would say this is around 2015, when we were working through this case, and we said we want to see what it takes for us to get Rajni a small intraday loan. And we went through the process, and we finally came up with that she needs to go through these 6 or 7 steps to get a loan. So she needs to first decide that she needs a loan, agree to share data about herself, see loan offers from multiple lenders, accept what is the best offer to her, receive the money, sell goods, and then repay the loan. And our view was, if we are able to make sure that she can do this from her own phone without going anywhere, then we would be done. So for these 7 steps, we sort of looked at what she would need on her phone. So clearly, one of the things that she would need is the credit marketplace app, which is where she would say that she needs a loan. We would need a mechanism for consent for sharing of data. Again, the credit marketplace would be used to see the loan offers. To accept the best offer and do the loan, she would need to do a paperless contract. And then to receive the loan, she would need to have a banking app where she could get the money, and then payment apps to perform her purchases and sales, and then again the payment app to repay the loan. And back when we were doing this in 2015, this is pre-UPI. And so at that point, we said, what do we need from the India stack? And of course, we had Aadhaar and eKYC to make sure that she could get access to the credit marketplace app. At that time, we had to put in a placeholder for the account aggregator, which would then allow her to share her data. For the credit marketplace, we said this is something which is specific to the application, and so you're going to need an API for loan offers. And for the paperless contract, you need a digital signature mechanism, which is e-sign, and a way to store the document, which is the digital locker. And then, of course, UPI, which was already in the design process by then, would take care of the transactions. And so we said each solution component, except for the API for loan offers, is being enabled by the India stack. And so to prove that such a thing could work, we actually put together a pilot to see how this would happen. So we worked with a bunch of folks who were in different groups. There were the lenders, there were the marketplaces, and then there were the data providers, and with enablers who helped them access the underlying India stack ecosystem. This is pre-UPI, so note the dates, April to June 2016, where we ensured that we were able to run a pilot completely compliant with the entire regulatory framework that we have to give out consumer and business loans, small ticket sizes, 10,000 rupees to a lakh, in multiple geographies. Each of these groups was working on a pilot in a different location. And we were able to get loans issued in under 5 minutes for the most part, in fact, much less. And this pilot showed us, sorry, there's a slide which is, sorry, there's a slide that's not loading. I'm not sure what the issue is. But we were able to show that loans given through such an effort were actually much lower cost than loans given through the standard process, or even with the use of alternate data in the standard process. And so we felt that this was really a fantastic way to get lending to move. And this is pre-UPI, so even before the digital payments fully took off. We imagined a place where you could have millions of borrowers with credit marketplaces connecting them to thousands of lenders who would then be able to get loans through consented data sharing on their mobile phones. And the entire process would be very, very data driven, with a lot of algorithms helping to define this. And this was really the way we imagined the data democracy. And that's something which we did. And then, of course, UPI came along. But while this was happening, within a year of our pilot, we had about 80 companies that we knew, startups that were already building fully digital workflows for lending. And, we think it was a fantastic outcome. And today, of course, there's many more. Now, with the account aggregator fitting into this use case, we actually think see many, many more uh, of these use cases come to life, and come to life in a much better way than we have before. And so just revisiting the stack, and this is how we have done it. And I would love to take questions now, by the way. I mean, we all know that India Stack as an architecture has been the basis for a lot of financial inclusion. We have seen the DBT, we have seen Jandhan, we are coming up with Ayushman Bharat and payments, but we think it will come in many other places as well. And so at this point, I would love to go back and take questions.
Looks like we have one, Sanjay, from Jigar. Is India Stack planning to introduce something similar to EIDAS, possibly
Sure.
backed by Aadhaar for FIs and other services? Currently, if a customer has to register to every single FI with its own registration and authentication system.
So EIDAS is a great standard for interoperability on ID, and so far I have not seen anything to indicate that we are moving in that direction. But I think the point I didn't make in the presentation was that India Stack APIs, each of these is very, I don't want to, is actually loosely coupled. It's not tightly coupled. So you can do UPI without Aadhaar. And you can go to an account aggregator without using UPI or Aadhaar. So the point being that every API is owned by a different regulator, different entity that creates the API and shares it, and yet they all work closely together, which is why we call it a stack, but they're not tightly coupled. While EIDAS actually works only in the identity space and focuses on essentially the equivalent of single sign-on. And would love to see somebody come up and do that. But in some senses, I think account aggregator does provide that, right? Because a consumer would register with an account aggregator, set up their banking relationships, and this would require the use of potentially multiple IDs. But then in the course of the transaction, you don't need to go and assert each of those IDs. So the account aggregator does provide essentially a single sign-on process, if you will, right? So I could go to a lender and say, I want to apply for a loan, and then go to my account aggregator and check, okay, take data from this bank account or this mutual fund folio, but not from this one. And I don't need to go into each of those bank accounts, etc., and use my username and password there. So it's not the same model as EIDAS, but certainly, I think you will get the same effect that you don't have to assert all your IDs multiple times. By the way, for those who are not familiar with EIDAS, EIDAS is a European standard for identity, and it allows a relying party in one country to accept a digital ID issued by another country. So it's a framework that works, and all countries who participate in it have to have their ID certified for that purpose. And similarly, the applications on the other side.
Very interesting. So, guys, you know the drill. You can put questions in the question section. Please keep any comments or chat to the chat section. And if you'd like to, come on stage and say a few words to Sanjay, ask him a question, using audio and video optionally, then please click the raise hand button and I can bring you on stage. But in the interim, while people kind of come up with questions, Sanjay, maybe I can ask you, something. So when did how long has the account aggregator really been in the works? And what we have today, what's coming out imminently soon? One of the questions we keep getting is, when is this going live? And the answer that we have is, very soon, hopefully a matter of weeks, we'll have banks actually allowing this to go live. So my question to you is, how long has it been in the works, and where does this current avatar fit in with the idea that you had when starting out?
So I'm aware of I would say it's been 3 to 4 years since we started this journey on the account aggregator. I remember, when RBI actually put out a consultation paper on the account aggregator, where they were looking to see how they could enable sharing of financial data with users, because previously it was all done through bank statements or accounts or scraping of online accounts. And they at that time still had in that first consultation paper, they had a very difficult process to enable sharing of data.
Hmm.
And where we stepped in and we felt that it was important that in this world that be purely API driven. And we submitted feedback to the Reserve Bank suggesting that instead of going with the physical process, they should go with actually a purely digital process. And then we engaged with them, and that led to the APIs being defined, created. Then a licensing process came into being. Then licenses were granted, and now the ecosystem is getting ready to launch. So I think it's been a continuous journey, about 3 to 4 years long, for us to get to this point. We did a similar thing, by the way, with UPI. Just so you know, that UPI also took about 3 years from the idea to going live, and so it's not very surprising. That's how long it takes to go through the regulatory process and get everything done. And then we have all the buy-in from everybody, right? And the system is completely blessed. So now, as soon as the use cases start to come on and go live, we will start to see the excitement build up among users, among the financial information providers and data providers to get into the system so that they can also participate in lending. Because almost every bank who's a FIP will also want to be an FIU so that they can access it. And lending as a first use case, like I said, digital lending is already taken off as a use case today. And I see that immediately transferring over to using the account aggregator,
Hmm.
which I think is, will hopefully give us a faster boost on the usage side as compared to UPI, which took a while to just, even start being visible as going off the zero axis.
Sure. So Nikhil has a question, but before we come to his question, I'd like to just ask you another one, which is that you were closely involved with a few different pieces of India's stack, UPI being the most recent one. So you know how it kind of goes. You just
Involved with account aggregator as well, just so you know.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for mentioning that. So you know how these projects usually unfurl. They take a long time to get through regulatory clearance, and then they kick off. And in the case of UPI and Aadhaar, the adoption is rapid from the get go. Hopefully, it's the same here. But I want to ask you to put on your VC hat for a second, because you are an investor with the Bharat Inclusion Fund. So I'd like to ask you, how do you kind of look or think about investments in this space? Do you think it's important to be invested now before it goes live, or do you think waiting and watching is something which is the right option?
So, from an investor perspective, when I look at making an investment, we come in at a seed stage. You don't come in at so it's an early stage investor. But even when we make an investment in a company, we look for either the founder's history, or we look for their first set of proof points in terms of what they've built, what they're able to demonstrate, so that we can have a lot more confidence as the money goes in. And so we do look for proof points of some kind. And I do think those proof points are available today, because if you look at digital lending, it's already taken off. So you should be able to sort of point to something that you're already doing, where you can quickly plug in the account aggregator and make a difference. Also, early conversations with partners who are enabling the use case. I think all of those go a long way. So it doesn't have to be fully working code running in the field for us to make an investment decision, but we have to see something there.
Okay, super. So look forward to your investments in this space going forward. So
So,
Nikhil had a question for you, Sanjay. He asks, how can Nikhil Kurhe from Finarkin Analytics? He asks, how can individual developers contribute to various parts of the India stack? Do you see India stack being exported as a service to other countries? And then he thanks you for doing this masterclass.
sure. No, so the way I think about India stack going global, I do think that many countries will want to replicate what we have done here. We have seen a lot of interest come from other countries saying, hey, they've seen what's happened with, for example, Aadhaar and DBT, and they want to use it in these times of the pandemic and see how they can benefit from it. They've seen UPI, and again, we've seen some interest even in the US where they want to adopt something similar. So we have seen a lot of global interest around India Stack. And for some of these I think the way, again, since they're all loosely coupled, right? They're not tightly coupled technologies. So in fact, we've been supportive of an open source ID platform which can be taken by other countries and they can implement it right away. So we actually created something called MOSIP, which is the modular open source ID platform, which is being built today, and there's at least 3 countries that are in the process of taking it and implementing it. So that's one way that will get exported. Similarly, on payments, NPCI has announced a plan to get a global version of UPI. And I mean, they've not really announced it. It was kind of there in an RBI announcement by mistake, but or I don't know about by mistake, but it was there. And so we know that there is a process to it going global, which we hope will happen soon. And other layers as well, I think we will start to see more because pull is there, right? And so it will happen. Now, coming to the open source question. So MOSIP was created as an open source platform, and you can contribute to that. Similarly, we would love to see people building around the core APIs and contributing those as open source so others could use it. And I think that would be a great value add to the ecosystem, because it actually allows the ecosystem to build faster, right? Because you're sharing expertise, and that makes it go much faster.
Just to add a little bit to that, Nikhil, if you'd like to volunteer with AISpirit or work on some of the initiatives AISpirit is working on, then please do reach out to community@aispirit.in. I'll put the link in the chat, and please just introduce yourself, and somebody can help walk you through the volunteering process, and we'll be very happy to to involve you where we can. It's all volunteer driven and volunteer led. So if you have something specific you'd like to contribute to or work on, please do mention that. As Sanjay was saying, the philosophy is very much one of community and kind of like openness. So definitely look forward to your contributions there. And secondly, something we've been telling people in the hackathon, Sanjay, is that if the current specifications and schemas for the account aggregator system are lacking in some way, we would like people to take this opportunity in the hackathon to actually extend them, to actually build around them, as you say. So that'll be of great value to the ecosystem. And one of the things which the judges will score the contestants on is actually their technical innovation. And one way to look at that is, does this solution elegantly utilize the existing architecture and specifications, and does it contribute something to it, right, in terms of implementation or perhaps a new API or something. So that's something also that we encourage.
Now, that'll be great. I mean, it'll be good to see the community take a role in defining these use cases, in defining how to build for them in innovative ways. And, and while a small group can create a nice cohesive set of APIs, I think it takes a community to make it richer and make it more usable in all the other scenarios that are out there. And, the wisdom of the crowds is always fascinating.
Super. So, as part of what I do at AISpirit is I talk to VCs quite often about the account aggregator, and we brainstorm about use cases. And some of the most common use cases, or something that comes to mind very quickly, is PFM and lending. So
right.
Using this framework to aggregate one's assets in one place, use that for wealth management, financial advice, and also for easier underwriting and stuff like that. So beyond that, what else do you see? I mean, I've seen one dichotomy of the AA broken down into basically credit-related use cases and marketing-related use cases. Marketing meaning, I understand your behavior pattern through your transactions, and I then say, hey, okay, Sanjay goes to Starbucks 4 times a week on average. Maybe I'll go to Starbucks and ask them if they would like to reach out to 20 such customers like Sanjay and give them a discount to get, let's say, 5 free coffees a week. And that's one way for Starbucks to improve their brand and increase loyalty or something like that. So what do you think about this marketing area of the account aggregator use cases?
So by the reason I picked the lending, the Rajni use case today for the talk was exactly this, was that I think that'll be the first use case to take off. Right? I mean, because like I said, there's an ecosystem out there of digital lenders who would benefit from plugging this in, and that will give it an instant boost. Though that has the danger, as you said, is that everybody focuses on only one use case, and to the detriment of other use cases. And there, I think the PFM use case, the marketing use cases, I think are quite interesting. Though frankly, the question comes back in terms of the marketing use cases. How much data are we willing to share for, say, that extra coupon at Starbucks, right? And that question comes up. But I could actually see a flipped advertising model, right? So I mean, today Google knows a lot about me and then goes to advertisers and allows them to do that. But if I could be assured that I could, let's say, have an app that does not take data away from my cell phone, but then allows me to connect to advertisers whose ads I would like to receive. Right? I mean, and whether they be coupons or just marketing messages, would I be willing to do that? And yes, I mean, there could be a company that does this matchmaking in between, and they could do it on the basis of my financial data. They could do it on the basis of my behavioral data, and so that mix could be quite interesting. I would like to see it happen. I would like to see the whole thing flipped in control of the user.
So another thing which came out in your talk, Sanjay, was that there's this clear kind of narrative, and for the past more than 10 years, the pieces of public infrastructure which have come out of India Stack have followed one cogent sort of arc. So beginning with Aadhaar, which enabled people to prove their identity and get access to banking, to UPI, which made it easier to transact digitally, and now account aggregators. So, account aggregators are leveraging the fact that people have these identities. They are generating digital footprints through UPI payments and other things. And now it's time to leverage that data for, access to better services and products. What is the next step? Assuming, this works out, where do you see India Stack going from here?
So I actually think that this has, been one journey which has gone on the financial side, because financial inclusion was seen as one of the goals when we were starting this journey. And we obviously didn't see this entire journey play out, right? I mean, when we started. But today, I think we have already come to a thought that health is going to be an important element. So in some sense, it's related to insurance, which is also financial inclusion, but it's also about health, right? So electronic health records. Now, these are data which is generated on the basis of my interaction with the medical system, right? It's not just about insurance, but it's about my health behavior, my history, and so on. And that, I think, is one element of, again, what we're calling the national health stack, which is developing even as we speak today, and has been accelerated by the pandemic. But that's something which I see happening very, very soon. That's one area. I think in terms of other spaces, I would like to see education, have some, because again, we are going to need to educate all our people.
Yes.
And that's something which I think technology is going to have to play a massive role in that. How can that happen? I'm not completely sure there's an answer yet, but I do think good infrastructure will make it easier, and that infrastructure will need to be built publicly.
For anybody watching this video or this masterclass, please do go onto the Sahmati and AISpirit websites, and you can find a bunch of information there. So on the AISpirit website and blog, we have some posts about the National Health Stack. There are recordings of open house sessions about the health stack, which are on YouTube with demos, Q&A, all of that. Currently, working groups are being formed to work on things relating to health stack. So do watch those and reach out. Similarly, on the Sahmati blog, there's a concept for something known as a loan service provider. More information about that will come out shortly, like a big launch of that whole system. But there is some data about that already out there. Basically, it's like an API for credit, the way that UPI was an API for payments. There's a system of open APIs for credit, which will come out, called the loan service provider. So please do check that out. We have one question for you, Sanjay, which I think is a good question from Satya from Chainame, who asks, on the other side of lending, collection, post-lending services, etc., where do you see India Stack fit in? Granular repayments? ?
So I think I don't want to see lending only as the first act in that thing. It's a relationship, right? So, for instance, we've seen people do invoice-based lending, right? So they go and they set up a relationship with a storekeeper, and every invoice that he makes a purchase of, they actually give him a loan equal to that, and then get collections on the other side. So certainly, it allows you to build a lending product which is not a typical term loan or you know you actually work with the customer and you can create a very custom financial product. And that financial product includes everything from the initiation of the loan to the repayment piece. We have heard of lenders who are providing a digital payment service so that every time a customer makes a payment, a small amount gets auto deducted and gets repaid as a loan. In fact, the loan agreement is structured in that way that you say that up to say X% of incoming payments will be used to repay the loan. And if in a month you have lower sales, the repayment is less. That's fine. And in a month where you have more sales, your repayment is more. And which is, I think, so as your business may have a seasonal variation and you can't do an EMI, there's actually a better repayment plan than anything else. So I do think that we will see those cases become more interesting and common, and they will address the customer's life cycle completely. It won't be in pieces, right?
Super. And another question is coming from Duke Dangley about, are there any identity verification related use cases of this consent management based framework?
So conceptually, a lot of identity management is about the user coming in and asserting an identity, and you verify based on facts that are known to the user, right? I mean, that's one thing. So the fact that I own a bank account, I could prove by logging into a bank account through a net banking password, doing a payment, or presenting data about my bank statement, right? And so I would see some of those start to show up where today, for instance, while most KYC that we are familiar with is a very basic KYC, right? Proof of identity, proof of address,
right?
And that's it. But logically, if I want to, let's say, trade in financial securities, I might have to prove that I have a certain minimum net worth. That's KYC, right? And similarly, I might have to prove that I am a reasonable decision maker with regards to financial transactions, so that I can make my own decisions and do certain transactions which are otherwise deemed risky. And so, for example, options trading, etc. Right. So today they ask you this questionnaire. Your banks will typically do set up a risk level and then offer the right products to you. And I see that some of that might benefit from the AA framework, where I can prove that, hey, I've been trading in the stock market for the past 3 years, and hence I can graduate to doing, say, options trading, but through a different entity, right? I might be trading with ICICI Securities, and today I want to go set up an account somewhere else, and I just need to show them that, hey, here's my history. I want to start trading in derivatives now. And so in some sense, I think if you expand the concept of KYC and identity and skills, I think account aggregator would play that role somewhere.
And we'd love to see projects like that in the hackathon. So there's, in the current sort of architecture, there is a data access type called profile, where you can share your profile with, somebody requesting it. So that includes, details like the holder of the bank account, the PAN number. So these are details which the bank knows to be true about you. So perhaps for some use cases, it can be, good enough KYC rather than the user entering all their details, manually. Maybe you just raise a request, the user just clicks accept the request, and identity gets shared. And the scope of that can only increase as more and more data sources come onto the platform. Right now, there's a few financial information providers, but if that gets expanded to include things like the DigiLocker service, which is a possibility, then you have different kinds of data coming onto the platform as well. So I think it's a really good question, and we'd love to see some innovation around that in the hackathon. There's a question here for you about the PCR. So I'm not sure, do you want to take that, or is that...
I can answer that question quite straightforwardly. The answer is that the account aggregator framework has been envisioned to look at the asset side view of the individual. So wherever I happen to have an account with, say, for example, savings or current or say a mutual fund folio or pensions and so on. It has not uh, uh, envisioned the use of credit side uh, 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 products, right? So it does not contain my credit cards, it doesn't contain any loans I have, and so on. And that's because there already is a mechanism through the credit bureaus of getting that data. And so the account aggregator does not play on the credit side of it at all. It only plays primarily on the user's assets side of life. So from that perspective, PCR does not qualify because it's not my assets, it's my credit history. So that's what. So yeah, so at this point, it's not envisioned to be part of this framework from a policy perspective, not technology perspective.
Yeah, maybe in coming times, something does happen. Of course, the PCR is also something which has been spoken about, but maybe it'll be some time until a full-fledged launch. Maybe there'll be, like a lighter launch before a full-fledged RBI launch, but I don't think we can put timelines on that just yet.
On that point, I mean, I do think that if the account aggregator takes off, there will be pressure to say, hey, why can't I get my credit score through the same mechanism? Why can't my credit bureaus become data providers? And why should somebody have to write and do a backend call without keeping me as a user in the loop? Score, right? I mean, logically, it's completely valid way to do it, except of course it's complicated because the credit bureaus are created through an act of parliament, and once we get to the point where this is deemed a successful, maybe the it'll go up to a point where you have to pass another act in parliament and enable this to come through this side of it. So because of I do hope we get to that kind of success, and would love to see it where even to get a credit score you have to go take my consent. I mean, why should you not have to take my consent for that?
Makes sense. So Sanjay, we have, hopefully hundreds of people will view this, many of whom are participating in the hackathon and, trying to get their teeth into this new infrastructure and learn about this new paradigm. Are there any sort of tips or pieces of advice which you would like to give them as they work on, their first account aggregator app or project?
Yeah, I would say, you've got to do two things, right? One is you want to be as ambitious as possible, right? Try to get the most innovative use cases out there. And at the same time, you have to get something to work, right? I mean, that's kind of the balance, flip side of it. You've got to mix these two pieces in there. And I think, if you can imagine it and, at least sort of say that, hey, if I had access to, so for example, my credit score also through it, then this is what it would look like. So at least put that into the UX and, talk your way through it. Judges always love to see ambition in people building things. But at the same time, they want to see something working. So make sure that the rest of it works.
Super. So I think that's been a really great session, and I think I can speak on behalf of everybody attending it when I say thank you so much. It was really a treat, and we're really excited to have you back as a judge on 1st and 2nd of August. So guys, you heard from the man. Ambition, but also make sure it works. So for those of you asking if there'll be a recording of this, yes, it's being live streamed on YouTube right now, and there will be a recording up on the Sahmati YouTube channel later. Thank you so much, Sanjay, once again, and really appreciate this talk.
Great, no, pleasure, Arvind. This is home turf for us. Great, thanks.
Super. So everybody watching this, thank you. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. for a talk about how to become an account aggregator, the process of filing an application, and also who and how one can become an FIU. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you